Welcome everyone, this is Kerjims channel. Now we are back to our new episodes of two semi-reality champions and comparison featured by Wild League of Legends versus the Mobile Legend Bang Bang. But before that, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click the bell icon so you will be notified to our new next episode video. Let's do this!
Let's start with Gnar's bio. Gnar's story begins many years before Freljord was turned into an icy death trap. Many years before it was even called Freljord. During those times, Gnar lived with other similar creatures among the tribes of the Northlands. Though he was tiny in size, his temper rivaled even beasts 10 times his size. And every time something went wrong, he was the first to babble out a number of curses. That was one of the reasons why Gnar preferred to stay with the bigger beasts, especially the wise ones that kept their distance from mortals. To Gnar, they looked like overgrown white-furred yordles, and that is all he really cared about. But we know that these giant white creatures were the now extinct Yetis. While their group traveled across the tundra, gathering wild berries and tasty moss, Gnar collected more essential items, like rocks, pebbles, and muddy remains of dead birds. His greatest treasure was the jawbone of a druvask. When he tugged it from the cold earth, he squealed with glee and flung it as far as he could. It landed 2 hops away. This is how Gnar got his boomerang that he decided to carry everywhere with him. On his other journeys, he found equally exciting items. Shiny lint, sweet nectar, round things. But none could match the pure joy he felt in throwing and catching his cherished weapon. And because he was now carrying a weapon, he considered himself a hunter. And so he now tracked herds of wild animals that couldn't care less about him. But then, even he felt a change coming to the lands. The sky seemed darker, the wind felt colder. The mortal tribes who had once worked together now appeared to hunt each other. Of course, Gnar was still a friend to the wise Yetis, and they would know what's happening. So Gnar decided to pay them a visit. Using his hunter skills, Gnar tracked them into the snow-capped peaks of a vast mountain range, much farther than he had ever wandered before. As he approached unseen, he also saw more mortals than he could count. This was exciting, but no one else seemed to be too happy about it. Then, the ground shook and split apart. For the first time in Gnar's life, it seemed as though everyone else was throwing tantrums. Mortals yelled, Yetis roared, but the monster's arrival silenced them all. Emerging from the newly opened abyss, it bore huge horns, whipping tentacles and a single eye, burning with strange light that made the fur on Gnar's back crawl. While some mortals fled at the sight, he began to feel odd pain in his chest, like the thought of losing his boomerang. He made the assumption that this horrible thing wanted to hurt his new friends, and that made him angry. In that moment, Gnar truly raged. He leapt into the air and grabbed a snowball, aiming at the monster. What he didn't realize is that Gnar's rage turned him as big as the Yetis themselves. And the thing he picked up wasn't a snowball, it was a boulder ripped from the mountain. He was ready to send the monster back from where it came, but his blow never landed. Some kind of elemental magic surrounded the area. Everything got so cold, the air itself turned into ice. A moment later, everything, including the monster, was silent. Those of you who are familiar with Lissandra's story know that this was her doing. Lissandra was manipulated by the Watchers to prepare Freljord for their arrival. But at the last moment, she managed to stop them by freezing the rift and everything that surrounded it. Gnar was unfortunately caught in the ice as well. But the ice wasn't lethal. Everything that got frozen was just slumbering. When Gnar finally woke up from his sleep many decades later, he found out he was alone. There was no monster to fight and no friends to protect. The land itself was very different too. There was snow absolutely everywhere, not just at the highest mountain peaks. Still, he let out a happy yelp when he saw his beloved boomerang laying beside him, and he scurried away to find something to hunt. Even now, Gnar has no grasp of what took place that fateful day, nor how he escaped. He simply marvels at the world before him, with so many oddities to collect and places to explore. His bio revealed a couple of interesting things to us. First of all, we learned that the Watchers have horns. I'm not sure how important it is, but it's a cool info nonetheless. It might be connected to the original concept in this constellation. Also, we learned that before the Holding Abyss incident, The Yetis lived in the mountains. They were hiding from mortals who had a history with destroying everything. But there was plenty of them. If you have a look at the map, you may notice Yeti's Vigil. That's where the Yeti civilization was hiding. We don't exactly know what happened to them, but one of the possible reasons why the Yetis got wiped out was because they were there when the Abyss opened. They saw what Lysandra had done, and they knew about her affiliation with the Watchers. So later, when Lysandra was trying to hide her past, of course she had to remove everyone who knew about her history. That included the Yetis. Now you may be asking, why is Gnar called the missing link? That's the thing. The story purposefully avoided answering that question, because there could be a number of reasons for it. The most probable reason is because Gnar is likely the oldest Yordle we have in the game. If you count his slumbering, he is technically older than Poppy or Kled. And because of him, it seems like Yordles weren't always the super smart magical furries. Since Gnar is a prehistoric link to the current Yordles, it confirms that Yordles were also primitive creatures at one point. In fact, the Yetis were much wiser than them. But maybe Gnar was an isolated subject. Maybe the northern Yordles were primitive, while in the other continents, Yordles already developed their society. What's also possible is that later in their lives, Yordles discovered some kind of magic or power, something that enhanced their brains. This is a theme that is popular in a lot of fantasy worlds, so Riot can definitely do that to Yordles as well. Either way, Gnar is a link to the current Yordles. The question should be, in what way is he a link? So, this was the summary of Gnar's bio. Now, let's have a look at the short story, Snow Day. That story begins in a typical Freljordian day. It starts with a couple of snowflakes and then quickly turns into a blizzard. Gnar was hiding from the howling storm. He was sitting in a nearby cave, trying to draw pictures in the snow. But he was angry because none of the drawings ended up looking the way he imagined them. He shouted Shubanufa, which according to our information could mean one of two things. Either he was mad at the snow for not cooperating, or he wanted some sweet milk. There was a number of sketches surrounding him, but each one of them was unfinished, and each one of them represented the same scene. Bands of carefree Yordles, living happily among the northern tribes. Sometimes there were creatures taller than his kin standing beside them, and sometimes Gnar stood taller than everyone else. Those differences didn't matter to him, and instead he was already drawing another version with his boomerang. He muttered to himself, Onalega, which means that he doesn't want to be disturbed. In the past, people often mistook it for Ogalaga, which means that he would very much enjoy a hug. He then placed his boomerang in his mouth and searched the ground around his work. He was sniffing the dirt for signs of pests that could defile his art. When he realized there was nothing to bother him, he jumped further away to get a wider look. His newest drawing pictured a one-eyed monster with tentacles the size of mountains. Gnar seemed pleased with his work. The monster was the right amount of scary, just as he imagined. One of its arms sliced an entire Elnuk herd, and another arm held a bundle of Elkir, which were the local goats. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that his Elnuk looked too much like Elkir. This wasn't the masterpiece he pictured in his mind, so he hopped closer to fix his art. That's when Gnar froze in place, perking his ears to sense incoming danger. He heard footsteps outside his cave. The first thought that crossed his mind was the monster. Maybe it came back to express its anger at how it was being portrayed. He picked up his boomerang and got ready to fight. Ever since he woke up from his slumber, he wondered where the monster took his friends. He was thrilled that he would finally get some answers. But when the enemy stepped into the cave, Gnar noticed it didn't have one eye, but two. And instead of tentacles, it had quite normal limbs. Two giant tusks and a snout revealed the strange creature to be a Druvask boar. Its heavy footsteps shook the ground inside the cave, stirring up the snow paintings like puddles of milk. When the boar finally found a comfortable stone to lay on, all of Gnar's art was ruined. A moment later, Gnar's boomerang hit the boar between its eyes. The dazed beast blinked away the pain, and it noticed Gnar holding his prized weapon in the air. Suddenly, like thunder and lightning, two roars boomed in the cave. One came from the boar, the other from the oversized Yordle. A battle louder than the blizzard outside erupted. Gnar punched and jabbed the beast with all his fury, but one strong kick with his hind legs sent him flying. Gnar landed on the other side of the cave, his landing once again making all his paintings mix up. The beast was now charging directly at him, but he managed to jump over it and send it flying the other way. The Druvask boar slammed against the cave wall near the entrance, and a few frozen rocks collapsed on it. It was quiet now. Gnar hopped closer and poked its body. There was no resistance. He figured it fell asleep, but he was wondering why did it leave its eyes open. A moment later, the snow around it turned red. It was all so curious to Gnar, but it wasn't the first time he witnessed something like this. Before his slumber in the ice, Gnar witnessed many strangers shouting gibberish and throwing sharp sticks at each other. It looked like an exciting and exhausting game to play, and Gnar always watched them until enough of one side fell asleep on red snow. They must have been awfully tired, just like the weird Tusk Fjordle before him now. These memories reminded him of his life before the ice, and he slowly shrank to his original size. He ran back to his boomerang and hugged it as hard as he could. It was the only thing that didn't leave him. Then he looked back at the boar. It was still sleeping out in the elements. The blizzard was raging on. It didn't bother Gnar, but he thought it might bother the boar. He hopped closer and covered the boar in snow. It was sleeping after all. It could use a blanket. That turned really dark. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other league facts and stories? And did you know that we have need mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.